What are design systems? How do we start one? And what are the challenges that we may encounter, especially with adoption? What are the most common mistakes of design systems? Why are they so valuable for both business and UX? This is episode 12 of The Industry of UX, a podcast crafted to review, share, and discuss the ins and outs of the user experience industry. In this episode, Paul Pittman and I talked about design systems with Ray Gonzales, lead UX designer at Zappos. You can subscribe to The Industry of UX from your favorite podcast app, and you can check out theindustryofux.com for show notes, episode details, and to leave comments and feedback. Also, don't forget to check out our Ko-fi page where you can make a small donation or buy our new gorgeous stickers at ko-fi.com/The Industry of UX. Let's dive right in with a question. Ray, how would you define a design system?
I looked it up on Google just so that I can have like a nice, concise definition because I think I can probably ramble on.
You have a Merriam-Webster definition of design systems?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's not Merriam-Webster. It's admittedly Envision.
I also doubt that Merriam-Webster has a definition of design system.
That too. I mean, unless they've like really kept up with UX and tech and whatnot.
Which I'm sure they have.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's their priority. Let's keep up with UX.
But yeah, I mean, according to Envision's definition here, and I like it because it's how concise it is. It's a design system is a collection of reusable components guided by clear standards that can be assembled together to build any number of applications.
Why do you like it?
Yeah, I mean, I like it because it's nice and short, right? Because really it's all about these reusable components. Like, okay, I have a button. It's styled a specific way. It's built a specific way. It behaves a specific way. Now I can take this and use it anywhere else in any page, any screen, any experience. I don't have to rethink everything. I could just do it and it speeds up my efforts.
Okay, so devil's advocate on that one. Why wouldn't that be a style guide?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess there's a lot of like conflation between like style guide, design system, pattern library, right? At least the way that I think of it is that for a design system, a style guide and a pattern library, those are all components of a design system. Those are just like small pieces of it. Whereas a design system, it goes beyond just like simply the styling of the thing, right? It goes into the usability of it, how it's built, what language it uses, how it extends, how you might be able to extend it if you're missing certain patterns, and how you generally approach the user experience. Do you approach it this one way, or do you approach it this other way? So it encompasses a lot more than just simply how the thing looks.
So you mentioned that there are ways to approach the user experience. How do you personally, if you had to start a design system, how would you approach it?
So my experience with a design system has not necessarily been in a very academic manner. I guess that is to say, like, we started definitely from this point, right, and then we end up definitely at this like paradise of design systems, right? My experience has always been that, we need something right now. Cool. All right, let's go build that thing right now. And then a couple of weeks later, we need this other thing. We kind of built this thing. It kind of could work for this page. Okay, let's use this thing for this page and then keep going. And then eventually over time, you start to develop like, all of these things here seem to sort of fit together. So why don't we call that a pattern and then start to build on top of that? So that's generally been, I guess, like my experience and my approach with design systems. It's like I've never come into an organization where they're like, yes, we absolutely have to have that. That's like, business critical. It's always been like, this feature, this function, this type of user, these are business critical things. Get that built. I don't care how you do it.
Paul, what about you?
Yeah, it's interesting because what Ray's touching upon is this sort of interesting working in tandem thing that happens with the design system, right? And a design language and design system are different things. The language is what you would use to put within the system. And then that language is built upon those components, right? And assets and those types of things. And there really isn't like a happy path to building one. Usually it does happen very organic, unless you walk into an organization and says, we're going to create this project, and over the next 6 months, we're going to build this robust design system, and we're going to apply all the design language assets and library components that we have within this system. And then we're going to have these rules and guidelines and principles that go along with that. Like that would be ideal. But in the real world, you're working, pretty much reactionary, right? And I can vouch that it's kind of where we are today. Even within Zappos, we're trying to build that design system with a language that we already are working with in tandem. And that's always been sort of that thing of how do you then get these components to a place that everybody has access to. And that's always been the interesting challenge. And it's a fun challenge, because the reason why I say it's fun is because you can bring in others to work with you collaboratively, right? Not just other designers, but you could bring in developers and program managers and anybody else you think could be part of that, even marketing, if you like, to help you, understand what it is that you want to build within the system. And what can we leverage today within our language that we can sort of work in tandem and have this thing kind of going out the door at the same time. That's been usually how I've been taking these things on. The other flip side to that is that a design system is not something you just sort of build it and they will come. It's a advocacy platform that you have to really make sure that everybody understands exists and how to use it, because some people may abuse it, right? And then there's a support system that sometimes that's required to that as well. So meaning like you're going to have someone who's going to maintain this system. You might work with other designers that are building these components, so you have to work with collaboratively. They might want to change these components, because that's the beauty of a design system, right? Is that it can build itself organically, right? And so that you keep this consistent level of experience going throughout your entire application. And when that does happen and things do change, that, I guess you could say, warden or gatekeeper of that system has to make sure that when those things are coming in, that they meet these standards that apply to our language. That's been my experience.
My experience with design systems is somewhat limited. I have definitely leveraged them a lot. And currently, the way I use it is I adopted this design system from Amazon called Meridian. It was actually brought to me by one of the developers on my team. He attended this seminar and he brought Meridian to me and said, "Hey, Filippo, can we use this instead of the one that we are using right now?" And I looked into it, and we kind of reviewed with the rest of the development team and our product manager, and we got all on the same page that we needed to use this because it was going to save us not only a tremendous amount of design time, but also dev time. Because the advantage of Meridian is that there is an entire team that is actually dedicated to building it. So that's the advantage of using that. I know, Ray, you have looked into Meridian quite a bit to find inspiration when you're building your own. But I know right now you're actually pulling together components to create a mobile design system, or what in the future is going to come together as a design system for mobile at Zappos. Tell me a little bit more about that. Like, what kind of spurred that need for you to start, where you almost said, enough, we need a design system?
I guess the biggest thing, there's multiple things that sort of, spurred the idea of like, oh, okay, we need a design system for mobile. Really, the biggest thing was maybe more a little bit selfish, right? And there's two parts to it. One is that for my own sanity, I need a design system. To just design things off the cuff is actually pretty difficult. And also, you run into issues where you might actually design something that's not particularly great, and you may not have the time to actually go address it. So that's one. Two is that, we don't have a whole lot of UX resources on the mobile side. And because we don't have a whole lot of UX resources on the mobile side, we end up relying on other folks to be able to execute on certain things. So for example, there might be this page that would require a button, and it would go through this certain type of experience. I wouldn't have time to design it. So instead I would just, turn over to one of the dev folks and say like, hey, we need to build this thing. It needs to do this thing. And that's it. So they would go off and build that thing, do that thing. and then it would come back, and it wouldn't look that right. There's like some inconsistencies here and there. There's some usability issues here and there, and you point them out and you help them along the way. But that entire process of this back and forth, it does eat up some time and some effort. So instead, if you have a design system, you can minimize a lot of that back and forth, right? You can build in these rules already that says, hey, this button is supposed to function in this way every single time. And it's supposed to work in this scenario, specifically in this other way. And so by doing that, then now I'm able to reduce the time that I spend on other things and can refocus my efforts. And then also the development team can also spend less time on this back and forth with me. They could just build this thing, it looks exactly the way it should, and then get it out the door.
Yeah, that's excellent. And and that's the thing too. And if you can catch them too, right? Like if you can catch what's going to go out the door before it goes out the door, then you can point out the inconsistencies. And that's always been the thing, is like if you can't catch it, then and it goes out the door. I've had that happen. I don't know how many times, and it ends up creating more problems than than if you would have just done it right the first time, because there's fixing it, and then maybe a lot of customers have seen it already, maybe they've gotten used to the bad behavior, or maybe they've dropped off, or whatever the reason is. But then that design system is kind of like that nice catch-all where it's like you go there, this is where it's at, so there's no more like something gets launched, you never seen what was going out there, and they kind of get it off the cuff. And that's always been the most, for me, I guess, applicable reason to have a design system, is sort of catch those unknowns that could go out the door.
Yeah, and to catch them before they even go out the door, right? Like to try and, I guess, catch things as they go out the door, that's a Herculean effort. You're never gonna get on top of that. But if you could stem the issue before it actually goes out the door, and then also empower everybody else to know what exactly is the right thing so that they can also catch things, then you multiply your efforts, and you force multiply the user experience.
Talking about how to set a design system up, because there is definitely a design component of the design system, of course, and then you have the dev side of things. A design system is also way more than that. So there is a set of rules and principles that go behind that. So how do you set that up? Do you first set the principles, or do you first start designing and then set the principles?
For Ray and I, we try and start off with a set of either tenets or core values, something that kind of helps set a standard to what we're trying to do. That's about 4 or 5 good solid tenets that you can apply to this before you actually start doing this.
Give me an example of a tenet.
Essentially, we're building this design system to save time between cross collaboration teams. That could be a tenet. Another tenet could be talking about how we're going to be improving the brand consistency. And then we could talk about another tenet talking about scalability, all these types of things, all the things that are going to be pluses to having this, and what we're going to do to ensure that we make these things happen, right? For us, that's how we lay out our tenets. And when you start laying it out that way, then you start thinking about breaking it down into more of a principle side. Okay, now what are our design principles around this? Like, what are the things that we're going to adhere to, that we're going to make consistent, and what are the ones we still got to discover before we make these an actual principle? And when we look at design principles, we talk about heuristics and all those other things that go along with design principles and apply them to what we're doing from a design perspective. The only thing is that you could run into, I find, when you're trying to build those design systems and you're applying your principles, is it might hinder creativity a little bit, because you've got these like gated sort of fence guidelines that you need to adhere to. And that could sort of hinder on the creativity side just a little. But then you're also making sure that you're gaining on the consistency and the correct experience at the same time, and building efficiencies, right? So there's a little bit of a trade-off there, I find. And then from there on out, I mean, I guess you could work in, there's not like, I mean, I don't know, I can't speak for everybody, but there's not like a correct path that you say, like, okay, now that I've done my tenets, now that I've done my principles, now I do my designs and these assets, I include accessibility within and all of that. These things could be happening at the same time, like organically in tandem. Like, I don't think there's a step-by-step process. I think it's sort of a, thinking about principles as you think about your tenets, and then what that could look like visually. That's kind of how I go about thinking about a design system. And then obviously you want to test these things before they become real. That's basically how I would start.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, I mean, I don't think you should ever think of these things as like set in stone, right? Because as time goes on, attitudes will change, environments will change, new problems will crop up. You'll need to develop and evolve your tenets and principles so that they can actually address those things. And it may even turn out that some of the principles that you or tenets that you'd set previously are already solved or super ingrained or no longer an issue. So in that case, then maybe it's time to rethink, pivot, reconsider whatever it is you need to do.
So let me ask you $1 million question. What's the ROI of a design system? Because that's the first pushback that it will get, right?
I mean, that if you can answer that crisply and clearly, my God, like everybody should hire you.
No kidding. If you know the answer to that and you got that magic wand, I want to be tapped with that. No kidding. I don't know. It's interesting challenge. I try to lead by example. That's one of the things that I try to do the most. What I mean by that is that, I'll always drop like the design system within a conversation where I feel like I can insert it to show that if we had this, or, because we're doing this, this is the benefit. And, that's the one thing we can do as advocates, just sort of preach a little bit and drop it where we can. I'm kind of doing that now, even today, where I say, well, I'm actually building a full-fledged feature right now. And in that feature, I'm starting with my wireframes. And when I'm having my conversation with my stakeholders and my leaderships, I always feel like, well, at this stage, I'm going to do some testing. I think it's going to go really well. Now, if we had a design system, we can literally work off of these wireframes, and look at what we have for our components and how they can apply to this design. Because now I'll have to go and spend time and design this in high res. And, then I'm going to have to hand these assets over and do all this extra work so that make sure we get everything. And then I'm going to make sure we're all aligned. And that's one of the things that I try and do. It tends to work not fast, but it works slowly. But for me, that's the best thing. And the other thing you can do is, because like Ray was saying earlier, is that it's really a benefit to us, right? It's a little bit of a selfish things for us ourselves. So we need to find a way to carve out some time within our schedules, right? Like even if we're doing a lot of things 4 days out of the week, we should be carving at least, a good 4 to 6 hours out of that week to dedicate to this system. And if anybody has to question that, then you can explain to yourself, to explain what you're doing on this. And this really shouldn't be a thing where it's a negative. It's really something that you're building for the benefit of yourself and benefit of others and the organization as well. So I don't really think that, unless they say, I actually would rather you prefer you do more of this than that, then, that still goes back to the magic wand. No answer to that. Then you got to pivot and then move in that direction. But that's usually how I try to do it. And the other thing too is that I find most of the time is that not everybody, even like when you look at developers and software development managers and stuff like that, they don't quite understand what a design system is. They don't always have the luxury of seeing what that does and how that's actually applicable to them. So there's like a little bit of an education on that side too. So when you do bring in conversations about having a design system, there's a little bit of education that goes along with it, right? That says this is the benefit of it. And if you did this, this could be much more seamless or something along those lines. So there's a little bit of that. And then, after hopefully some time, you might get some traction or you might not.
Yeah, it's definitely somewhat of a crapshoot for sure, right? Like, discussing like what is the ROI for this thing, right? So you could take the front door approach, which is, all right, I'm going to go to my stakeholders. I'm going to come with some data and some research that says, oh, it returns this amount. But the question is always going to be, well, okay, cool. So the industry sees this, but what are we going to see specifically? And your answer is going to be, won't really know until we try it, which is usually not good enough. And so, another approach you might be able to take is to like see if you might be able to piecemeal it, right? So, okay, I know that this thing needs to get fixed. All right, cool. So let me fix this thing, and then let me A/B test this and measure it. And then let me bring that data and show them, oh, okay, by doing this A/B test, I was able to say that conversion went up by X%. And then also the development time for this thing here went down by X%. And so if I scale this out for a year, this is how much I would save just on this one little thing. That's another way to approach it. However, all of those approaches, though, are, in my opinion, maybe not as effective as like sort of the backdoor approach that you were saying, which is like sort of the squeaky wheel thing, right? Oh, okay. Well, the design system here. So not only do you keep it top of mind that like this is an important tool for you, but also like if you can get everybody else on board, get your advocates, get them all saying, hey, they need this thing. Your developers, your product managers, is probably more effective, right? Because if you can get a bunch of people saying that you need this thing, then eventually you're more likely to get it, as opposed to you just trying to throw numbers and like brute force your way into getting this thing. Granted, I think you should probably take both approaches, but yeah, get advocates, keep talking about it, and things will start moving. Like once you gain momentum, latch onto that, and then just keep hammering away at it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I can tell you that from my experience, the way I personally sold it to our product manager was about saving dev time. So it wasn't a hard sell because our product manager, Danielle, she is very receptive when it comes to UX. So she worked at Microsoft in the past. So she's very much in the know when it comes to design systems. I basically just talked to the development team and we figured out that we were able to save about 40% of their time by adopting a fully grown design system. So when I talked to Danielle, I told her, hey, there is this really interesting metric about saving this much time. And on the design side, we're also going to save time. And you can also quantify that, right? You can average the rate of a developer for an hour of their time. And for 40 hours, 40% of 40 hours will be 16 hours. Now you scale that to a team, and now numbers are starting to become more and more appealing.
One other aspect, like I guess, to doing the math behind this is that it's more than just simply the savings, right? It's you got to your solution 16 hours sooner.
Yeah.
So if you imagine it that like per, I don't know, per initiative that you have, like minus 16 hours, like you could save yourselves a couple of months to getting to the value that you want to deliver.
That's a brilliant point. What are the top mistakes when it comes to design systems?
Yeah, I could take a stab at this one. Some of the mistakes that I've seen, like I think one of the bigger ones that I've seen is, designing your systems within a vacuum. It's like, you just pretty much do the thing, design it out, and then say, hey, everybody, this is the way that it's supposed to be. Cool. Okay. People take a look at it and they're like, all right, I could borrow some pieces, but this isn't going to solve everything that I need. And so they end up not adopting it. So that's one like potential thing that I see. I think another issue that I have definitely seen is not knowing who your audience is, and your audience is not necessarily the end user. Your audience is generally going to be the people that you work with, right? It's going to be the developers who need to actually build this thing. It's going to be the marketers who need to replicate the style or the language or the tone of whatever it is that you built. It's going to be everybody else around you. And then ultimately it's going to be the end user. So there's a lot of things to consider there.
Yep, definitely. For me, one of the things that I've kind of seen happen a lot is understanding how the components are going to actually interact. I think sometimes we get in this little bit of a silo where we start designing these components, but we don't quite know how they're going to interact with other things. That's one thing I've seen happen a fair bit. So what ends up happening with that is you'll hand this over and then you'll end up getting questions, or developers might decide it's going to interact a different way than what you thought it should interact with. That's probably because there was no guidance behind it. So that's one of the things I see that's commonplace with that.
Yeah, I think something that I have experienced kind of latches on to something that you both brought up, and it's the socialization of it, because you can have a beautiful design system, but if it's not socialized with the folks that are going to be directly and indirectly impacted by it, it's going to fail. What is the advice that Paul right now and Ray right now will give to young Ray and young Paul when you first approached design systems?
Don't be shy. I guess, is the first one. Just because you don't know about it doesn't mean you won't learn. That's one of the things that I was kind of concerned about was when I got into this for the very first time, didn't know too much about it, and obviously, I think the group of us here have come from UX in the early stages where design systems, UX wasn't even a thing, and now design systems is a thing. So even back then, people would still think of us as crazy to bring up something that, they don't even know anything about UX, and now you're asking me about this. And so for me, it would be not to be shy and just ask questions, right? Like, I think when I started getting into design systems, it felt like it was something that I should know. Like, I felt like it was something that I should be an expert at or something, or I should have some type of major knowledge around. And that made it difficult for me to like ask questions that might make me look silly or incorrect or something along those lines. And what all that did for me was took me a little bit longer to get there because I wasn't able to find those answers and ask and stuff like that. And I relied a lot on Google and internet for searching to find stuff. But I think so when I say shy, I mean speak to others. Just ask people those stupid questions like that you don't have answers to. And don't be afraid to see what they have to say about it, what their feelings are, what they think they want, and that kind of stuff. That would be my first advice, because it's not a skill set that's built into UX designers. The building a design system, it's an additional, right? It's something that you would really like to have, and organizations still don't know too much about it themselves. So it's okay to go in there and be a little naive, and try and figure it out.
Yeah. I guess just echoing off of that, that whole naivete, I definitely experienced that as well on my end. But I guess like the way that it manifested itself was that, as I was trying to work towards some design systems, I would encounter roadblocks. And back then, as Paul mentioned, it wasn't necessarily always called design systems. Really, it was just like, oh, okay, can we get more consistency across these things? Can we build these in a way that actually is scalable across a bunch of different things? Anyways, going back to my story about like naivete, I guess like the way that I was approaching it was, oh, okay, I need to get buy-in. I absolutely need to get these folks to be in my corner to start doing these things. And the answer there is a little bit nuanced. I think, to get started, you don't really need to have that many resources. You just need to have the desire to want to have, consistency, scalability, and all the benefits that come with a design system, just to get started. To make it more effective and more impactful, that's where you'll need to get buy-in. But to get started, just on your own, you can start doing stuff, right? You can start documenting. You can start showing how patterns work, testing things. And then as you start to build up this library of stuff, people will start to take notice, especially if you continue to reference it and say like, oh, hey, like this thing here is used in this place, so we should continue to use it this other places. And then as you continue to build momentum and get advocates, I guess that's at the point where you can start to, think about scale and how you might bring it up and get buy-in from a larger group. But yeah, I mean, essentially, to get started, don't hesitate to just try something, get started, start documenting. At the very worst, nothing will happen from it. At the very best, you'll have a design system.
What would you like to add?
I guess for me, it would probably be people think that they need to be coders to build a system. I don't think you need to be. You don't have, you can, as designers, we kind of generally know about front-end development, most of us, but that's not a requirement to do this. You could probably use a system or something that pre-exists today. That there's a lot of platforms out there that can help you build one, almost just drag and drop if you need to.
Yeah, and I guess, to add to that, we're living in a day and age now where there are a bunch of design systems out there and also a bunch of design system services out there as well. That'll help you shortcut that. So you don't need to approach it from scratch. I think there's ways that you can leapfrog and get to the value that you want much faster than what was possible maybe when we first started thinking about design systems.
And that's the end of my chat with Paul and Ray. Thank you for listening. You can subscribe to The Industry of UX from your favorite podcast app, and you can check out theindustryofux.com for show notes, episode details, and to leave comments and feedback. Also, don't forget to check out our Ko-fi page where you can make a small donation or buy our new gorgeous stickers at ko-fi.com/The Industry of UX. Thank you so much for listening again, and I hope you have a great day.